Well, earlier this evening I was joined by the Immigration Minister Chris Bowen. He was in our Parliament House studio. Chris Bowen, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure, Tony.
As you've seen, we have a number of documents, including the draft agreement with Malaysia's changes in it, internal UNHCR documents and emails. Let's start with Malaysia's proposals. First of all, they're demanding there be no special status for the 800. They'll be subject strictly to Malaysian law. Given that Malaysia is not a signatory to the Refugee Convention, is this acceptable to Australia?
Well, Tony, let's make one fundamental point very clear. We have an agreement between the Prime Ministers of Australia and Malaysia, which has been made public. We've been involved in discussions with Malaysia and with the involvement of the UNHCR and the IOM about how to operationalise that. Now, of course, in those discussions you have an exchange of documents. Many dozens of documents get exchanged. These discussions have been based on goodwill, an agreement in implementing and honouring the commitments made by the Prime Ministers. Those discussions are very well advanced and will be judged on the results of those discussions. In terms of documents which purport to be working draft documents that get exchanged from time to time, I understand the interest in those, but the situation will be that we will operationalise this agreement and we will commit and operationalise the commitments given by the two Prime Ministers on behalf of their governments to break the people smugglers' business model and also to ensure fundamental protections, a big step forward for human rights for those in Malaysia.
The documents, can I just interrupt your flow there just for a moment? The documents are pretty clear on a number of principles, and one of the principles is that the 800 will be subject to Malaysia's laws, rules, regulations and national policies. Is that okay with Australia? Have you agreed to that?
Well, Tony, I'm not going to provide you a running commentary. I will say this. The people transferred from Australia to Malaysia will be transferred with the agreement of Malaysia. Therefore, rules which apply to others don't necessarily apply to the people who are transferred from Australia to Malaysia under quite separate agreements. And the Malaysian government has been very clear, a very clear commitment to deal with those people in a way which respects their dignity, which respects human rights standards. And that is why organisations like the UNHCR have been involved in these discussions. We've also indicated we'll have...
I'll just stop you at that point, because you've mentioned human rights standards, and the UNHCR was concerned about the fact that in the document they saw Malaysia specifically remove the term human rights from the text.
Well, Tony, as I say, this underlines the fact the UNHCR has been involved in the discussions. Of course, the UNHCR being involved in the discussions is going to provide commentary and feedback on various drafts at various times. The documents that you have, which purport to be working draft documents, are not necessarily reflective of the state of discussions between Malaysia and Australia, which are very well advanced, are done in a spirit of goodwill, and which we have received feedback not only from Malaysia but also the UNHCR. This is a very significant opportunity for Australia.
Would you accept the removal of the term human rights from the document? Because the UNHCR is clearly concerned at this. Their response notes that the Malaysian text removes the standards of treatment set out in the earlier versions of the agreement. Is this a sticking point?
Well, Tony, this is what I accept. I accept we'll be judged on results, both the results of the final agreement and the results of the implementation. And I'll come back on your show and we'll talk about the results. We'll talk about the results in breaking the people smugglers' business model. We'll talk about the results in protecting the human rights of the 800 people we transfer and making sure that they are dealt with in ways which means they're not returned to countries where they may be in danger, which means that they are able to have their claim for asylum assessed in Malaysia. Malaysia and Australia agree fundamentally and completely that with this model is a bold and innovative step, which is going to take some detail to implement, which is going to take various steps to implement. But we agree on the principles as outlined in the Prime Minister's statement, and documents which you have which reflect one version of a possible draft at one point in what have been very detailed discussions.
We're actually talking about last week. In actual fact,
Tony, as you know, in international discussions,
yes,
Tony,
you're right. Things change over time, but this is pretty recent. Yes. And what I'm saying is the
Tony,
UNHCR objections. Just hear me out on this for a moment. The UNHCR objections include emails in which, for example, the head of the UNHCR in Canberra, Richard Toll, says the level of protection for the 800 may not meet required human rights standards. On the 25th of May, the Assistant High Commissioner of the UNHCR says the new text is not one we can endorse or be positively associated with. Now, you may be saying there are significant changes underway, but clearly the UNHCR has serious concerns about what's evolving here.
Well, I'll let the UNHCR speak for itself, Tony, and I don't purport to speak for the UNHCR, and I'm sure the UNHCR would be happy to talk to you. But the situation is that the UNHCR has been involved in the discussions. Of course, the UNHCR provides feedback on various ways of implementing this. That's appropriate. That shows that we've asked, and the Malaysians have been keen, for the UNHCR to provide their feedback.
Well, yeah,
now,
I mean, it's more than feedback, isn't it? Because you actually can't make this agreement without the agreement of the UNHCR.
Yes, the UNHCR is a very fundamental part. This is a just to be clear, this is a bilateral agreement between Australia and Malaysia, but both Australia and Malaysia do agree. We want the UNHCR involved. Absolutely, I agree.
They have to be involved. You can't do it without their agreement, as I understand it, and I'm wondering how you're countering the fundamental concerns they have for the welfare of the 800.
Judge us on results, Tony. Judge us on the results of the final agreement and the implementation of the agreement. And no doubt I'll be on your show in future months and we'll talk about how the agreement's going. And we'll talk about the implementation of the agreement. We'll talk about whether it's been successful in breaking the business model.
Okay,
we'll
you're
talk about the
talking about the
protections that are
future.
provided.
I'm talking about there's a fundamental public interest in how the agreement is, how it evolves and what's actually in it. It's not being discussed, it's happening secretly. This is our first insight, in a sense, as to how it's evolving and what some of those secrets are. So can I just confirm this? The 800, according to the documents we've seen, will be solely subject to Malaysian law, therefore will be regarded in law in Malaysia as illegal immigrants and potentially subject to harsh Malaysian penalties, including caning. Can you rule that out completely?
Yes, I don't accept that at all, Tony. And as I say, the agreements indicate respect for fundamental human rights, and clearly that indicates no caning. And I also make the point that...
can I just ask you, have you got the agreement of the Malaysian government that they will not cane in any circumstances any of these 800, because it's clear from reports, including today, that they are caning people who they regard as illegal refugees or illegal immigrants, including people who are regarded by the UNHCR as refugees simply for not carrying documents in some cases?
Well, Tony, saying that people will have to comply with Malaysian law is not the same as the implication and inference that you are drawing. The people transferred from Australia to Malaysia will be transferred with the agreement of the Malaysian government, and of course protocols will be in place to ensure that they are treated according to the agreement between Australia and Malaysia, which is that their fundamental human rights will be protected.
Is there a no caning clause in the agreement?
Well, Tony, we already have a commitment from the Malaysian Prime Minister, very clear, and that will be operationalised. And as I say, because it's the case, the only document that counts is the one that's signed, and the only thing that counts at the end is the result. I understand your focus on the process. I completely understand and respect that. And I understand your interest in one document out of many dozens exchanged, many versions, many drafts.
There's one draft document, which is a reply from the Malaysians to a document that you've given them. There's several other documents from the UNHCR and then a whole bundle of emails as well. I mean, it's not just one document.
Well, Tony, there's been dozens of documents exchanged, of course, between Australia, Malaysia and the UNHCR and the IOM. You would be surprised if that wasn't the case. You would be surprised if, in the course of discussions, documents didn't evolve through an iterative process. I think you would accept that principle.
No, I understand, I understand what you're saying, but there are some basic principles here. And until now, for example, you've refused to give any details about how children will be treated under this agreement, including, according to these documents, you've already decided, that is, Australia has already decided, that unaccompanied minors among the 800 will be sent to Malaysia. Is that correct?
Well, Tony, I've been very clear that you need to send a strong message. I don't want unaccompanied minors, I don't want children getting on boats to come to Australia thinking or knowing that there is some sort of exemption in place. I never want to go through, and I never want our nation to go through, what we went through in December and late in months following, burying children as a result of a boat accident. And it is inevitable that that will occur again unless we break the people smugglers' business model.
So just confirm, just to confirm, you are actually saying that in order to break the people smugglers model, you will make an example within the 800 of the unaccompanied minors and send them to Malaysia. Is that correct?
It's not a matter of making examples of people, Tony. It's a matter of ensuring you have a robust system in place to break the model. And, of course, we will treat people with dignity, and, of course, we will treat people with regard to their circumstances as to how we implement this arrangement.
But no exceptions for unaccompanied minors, is that what you're saying?
I do not want to send the message that it's okay to get on a boat if you fit one sort of particular category. Now, I know these are hard decisions. I know these are motive and difficult issues. I understand that with respect probably better than most people, because I've got to make these sorts of decisions and calls regularly, and as everybody involved in this space does. But what we do need and what we have is a firm agreement with Malaysia to break the model. Now, of course, in terms of how we implement that, with the people we send to Malaysia, how they are cared for and catered and educated, of course, they are issues that we would be working with Malaysia on.
Let's just stick with this for a moment. Another document we have is the UNHCR Situation Report on the Treatment of Refugee Children in Malaysia, dated April this year. It says they face serious challenges, the UNHCR face serious challenges monitoring the well-being of minors in Malaysia. They are forced to move around a lot. The shelter services available to them are often short-term, inadequate and lacking in safety and protection. How do you deal with that?
Well, I think that underlines why I think Australia and the UNHCR see benefits in this arrangement. We see benefits for a more integral role for the UNHCR in the treatment of asylum seekers in Malaysia. We also see benefits, frankly. There are 18,000 children amongst the asylum seekers in Malaysia. Let's not forget them. I know there's a lot of focus on the children that make it to Australia's shores. There are 18,000 children asylum seekers in Malaysia. I'd like to see them heavily represented in the people we resettle from Malaysia to Australia, and they will be. And this is an opportunity. At the moment, Australia resettles a couple of hundred people a year from Malaysia. We'll increase that to 1,000 a year for 4 years.
Okay,
that's a very significant opportunity to improve the lives of lots of people, Tony.
Well, look, there's no doubt that refugees who are brought to Australia will be better off than they are in Malaysia. We're talking now about the ones you're sending to Malaysia and what circumstances they'll find themselves in. Are you going to make a special deal for these 800 so they'll be treated differently to the refugees who are in Malaysia now?
Well, Tony, the agreement makes it clear that in terms of treatment of applications and asylum, there's no preferential treatment. The agreement also makes it clear, and I think, again, while I don't want to speak on behalf of the UNHCR in my discussions with them, it's why they see significant potential in this agreement to improve the protection of people in Malaysia, to work with the Malaysian government cooperatively, with the Australian government cooperatively, to improve results for many people.
But I've got to ask you this. How can it be... I know we're short of time, so I'm sorry to be interrupting you like this, but there are a few issues to go over. If there's no special treatment, how is it that Australia is going to be paying the costs for, direct and indirect, according to the document, for health, welfare and education of the 800? That's special treatment, isn't it?
Well, Tony, I make this point. There's no special treatment in relation to fast-tracking of asylum claims or special treatment in relation to people getting resettlement elsewhere. We have made it clear that we will work with Malaysia and the UNHCR on respecting the fundamental rights of people and working with people to ensure better protection outcomes.
But you'll be paying the costs for the 800 in all these areas I just outlined according to the document. That's correct, is it?
Well, Tony, again, I'm not going to provide a running commentary on one working draft from what is many working drafts, many versions, which develops through a spirit of goodwill and cooperation. I do want to emphasise this point, Tony, because it's a very important point. I know it's tempting to see this as some sort of contest between Australia and Malaysia. It is not. This agreement represents the potential for a win for Australia, a win for Malaysia, a win for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, a win for 4,000 people who get transferred from Malaysia to Australia, and a big loss for the people smugglers. And that is the spirit which Australia and Malaysia and the UNHCR are embracing what have been very productive, fruitful discussions between our two nations in consultation with the UNHCR and others about how to operationalise and implement this agreement. And I look forward to coming back onto your show and talking about how it's going and for you to judge and your viewers to judge the government on its results.
Then, how close is the deal?
It's very well advanced, Tony. Of course, I'll be making more statements about the discussions, but the discussions are very well advanced, as I say, in a spirit of goodwill, and I look forward to be able to talk much more about it in the near future.
Are we talking weeks or months?
We're not talking months, Tony.
Weeks?
We're talking weeks. Yes.
Chris Bowen, we'll have to leave you there. I know you've got other things on your plate at the moment. We thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us and answer these questions tonight.
My pleasure, Tony.